Have you heard about Fear Not Christianity? A Christianity of brave fronts and happy ever afters, but leaves little room for the open acknowledgement of fear. If you're not familiar with this brand of religion, I'll give you a quick primer. It sounds like this. Fear not appears in the Bible more often than any other imperative. It's a commandment. This means that if we fear, we sin. Perfect love casts out fear. If you're afraid, then you are not rooted in God's love. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear is an aberration, an unsoundness of mind, a brokenness devoid of God. You can't be fearful and faithful at the same time. Fear is a clear sign that you lack faith. I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm not. I've heard these devout responses for fear all the time. Instead of inspiring courage or trust, they coaxed ever-present fears in guilt, shame, and hopelessness. In our gospel story this week, the disciples contend with deep, primitive fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of suffering, fear of death, fear of oblivion. The setting is the Sea of Galilee, a body of water surrounded by hills and prone to sudden, violent windstorms. It's nighttime. The disciples are in a boat crossing the sea on their own as per Jesus' instructions. As the night wears on, the wind and waves intensify. The disciples, still far from land, struggle against the turbulent water. Meanwhile, Jesus, having spent the previous day teaching and feeding the 5,000, is up on the hills, seeking renewal in solitude and prayer. Sometime before dawn, Jesus descends from the hills and approaches the boat. When the disciples see him walking on the water towards them, they're terrified. "It's a ghost," they cry. Immediately, Matthew's gospel tells us, Jesus identifies himself in an effort to reassure his disciples. "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." As far as we know, 11 of the disciples, frozen in fear, say nothing. But Peter, rash, impetuous, over-the-top Peter, proposes a bizarre test to prove the would-be's ghost's identity. "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus says, "Come," and Peter steps boldly, maybe recklessly, out of the boat. For one luminous second or 2 or 10, Peter walks on the water towards Jesus. But then he realizes what he's doing. He notices the vicious wind, rising waves, the dark water, and fear overwhelms him. He begins to drown. "Lord, save me," he cries. Again, immediately, Jesus reaches out his hand, catches Peter, and delivers him to safety. "You of little faith," Jesus says to the breathless, sobbing Peter, once the worst of the danger is over. "Why did you doubt?" We never hear Peter's answer, if he manages to offer one. But as soon as he and Jesus climb into the boat, the wind dies down, the sea grows still and calm, and the disciples recognize Jesus for who, what he is. Truly, they say in awe, "You are the Son of God." On the face of it, this story might appear to reinforce a fear not version of Christianity. I've certainly heard sermons that declare as much. See, when Peter exercises bold, fearless faith in Jesus, he is able to do the impossible. His faith empowers him to walk on water, just like Jesus. But as soon as Peter gives into fear, he nearly drowns. To put it mildly, I don't agree with this reading. To put it less mildly, I think this reading is dangerous. Nowhere in the Gospels are we called to prove our faith or to test God's character by taking pointless risks that threaten our lives. Nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus teach us that bad things happen to us because we're too chicken to earn God's protective care. Whether we're talking about respecting the power of the sea during a vicious storm or heeding expert medical advice during a global pandemic, the same caution applies. Recklessness is not faith. Stupidity is not courage. Notice carefully the timeline of events as Matthew's gospel relates them. When the disciples see Jesus walking on the water, they're terrified. They don't recognize him. They think they're seeing a ghost or a demon. And naturally, they cry out in fear. At that instant, immediately, Jesus offers them comfort and reassurance. He tells them exactly who he is. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. We don't know if the silent 11 take Jesus at his word, but we know for sure that Peter does not. He sets Jesus an identity test. Lord, if it is you. Listen carefully. Can you hear the echoes of another famous identity test in Peter's words? The identity test Jesus faced in the wilderness 40 days after his baptism? If you are the Son of God. What's at play here is not the morality or immorality of human fear. What's at play is how we respond to God's presence when we're afraid. What's at play is what we say, think, feel, and do when the divine comes to us in guises we don't recognize. The disciples are not wrong to be afraid. Of course they're afraid. They're afraid because they aren't keen on ground. They're afraid because gigantic waves in the middle of the night are scary. They're afraid because they lack the tools with which to possess or process what they're seeing. Human beings don't have the ability to walk on water. And if we extend the meaning of drowning to include all the ways in which we human beings find ourselves in or over our heads in this world, then of course we experience fear. Of course we feel afraid as COVID-19 and failing economies and political brokenness. Of course we feel afraid when unhealthy marriages, sick children, unfriendly neighbors, grinding jobs, and financial security uncertainty threaten our lives. Of course, we feel afraid when our basic biology betrays us into anxiety, panic, and depression. The issue is not fear. The issue is where fear leads. Notice the first place that Peter's fear leads him. He has every right to be afraid when his boat pitches in the dark sea. Feeling scared in the face of danger is not the problem. The problem is that his fear leads him straight to suspicion and distrust. His fear leads him to test and question Jesus' identity instead of taking Jesus' self-disclosure at face value. If it's you, enable me to do the impossible. If it's you, make magic happen so that I will be dazzled out of all doubt. If it's you, reorder reality and prove to me that you are God. Needless to say, Peter's action in this story cut right through. I recognize them so well. Like Peter, we fail to recognize Jesus when the going gets rough. When we face fearsome circumstances, our go-to position is not trust, it's suspicion. In our fear, we forget that our relationship with God is multifaceted and complex, and we reduce it to something crassly transactional. Okay, Jesus, prove that you care about me. I'll do A, but you had better do B in return. Interestingly, Peter's test fails. Despite his initial boldness, he's not able to prove who Jesus is by walking on water. He fails within seconds. Why? Because Jesus doesn't calm the sea for Peter's convenience. Even though Peter steps out of the boat, his circumstances remain wild and turbulent and dangerous. If Peter thinks he can manipulate Jesus into making faith easy, he learns otherwise fast. To truly trust Jesus is to hold two pictures of God's kingdom in productive tension. Yes, sometimes Jesus demonstrates his power in miraculous, technicolor ways. At other times, though, we need to trust that his incarnation, his quiet, abiding presence in our wild, untamed lives, is sufficient for the circumstances we face. Sometimes, Jesus' power is paradoxical. It comes to us in what looks like vulnerability, weakness like strangeness. The wildness of the sea is no proof of God's absence. Once Peter is safe in the boat, Jesus asks him the questions he can't answer. You of little faith, why did you doubt? I wonder if Jesus asks this question not because Peter gives way to panic and nearly drowns, but because his doubt compels him to make a foolish request in the first place. I wonder if Jesus' question means something like this. Peter, as soon as you saw me, I told you exactly who I was. You heard my voice. I spoke words of assurance and comfort to you. Why didn't you believe me? Maybe when Jesus asks us why we doubt, what he is really asking is, why do you doubt me? Why do you not trust that I'll be honest with you? Why do you not doubt that I am with you, for you, in you, and around you? After all this time, why do you still feel a need to test me? In my mind, the power of this gospel story doesn't lie in Peter's faith, doubt, courage, or fears. Peter's trajectory, fascinating though it is not the point of the read. Jesus' trajectory is the point, because unlike Peter's, it never changes. It is constant, focused, relentless, and unidirectional. From the very beginning of the story, Jesus moves towards his disciples. He moves towards them when they're struggling at sea. He moves towards them when they decide he's a menacing ghost. He moves towards them when they're terrified by his approach. He moves towards them when they're reckless enough to set him a date. He moves towards them when they begin to drown. He moves towards them when they ask for help. He moves towards them when they're shivering and sorry for their rashness. He moves towards them when they realize, for a beautiful, flickering instant, who he is and what he is. He moves towards them when they worship him. In other words, Jesus never stops moving towards the one he loves. He never stops crossing the dark water to come where we are. Neither our fearfulness nor our faithfulness never alters his steady approach. We are the ones he's bound for. Our flailing bodies are the ones he pulls out of the water. Ours is the boat he climbs into. It is for us that he calls out across the terrifying waves again and again and again. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Amen. Announcements. I know we have the band thing tonight.
6 o'clock at the Otis Park Band Show.
I know that today is the second Sunday, right? That's what all this is here for. So any donations to Life Pantry, please bring those up. Who takes them? Just so I'm, you guys do. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for that. I know there's a vestry meeting after today's service. Any other announcements? Awesome.